Okay, thank you for joining us also for the second part. Now we shift to another session which is devoted to the open source and also to running project, so some project that have started after iSprint. This session will be moderated by John, so the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Danilo, and welcome to the session that I promised you this morning that is dedicated entirely to open source. We have four speakers who are extremely prominent in the open source landscape in Europe. And we're going to hear first from Luis Carlos Busquet of the European Commission, who is one of the most prominent supporters in the Commission. I have had the honor of working with him in open source over the last couple of years, so I can testify to his commitment to open source, and we're going to hear from him on the EC perspective. So the floor is yours, Luis.
Thank you. I'm trying now to share the content, but it seems that it does not work. So maybe...
Let's try again. You should be already a presenter, actually.
Well, it says non si può parteggiare contenuto.
Yeah. We should not test for. We should not test for. Gael, you are not presenter anymore, right? No. Let's see.
Yeah, sorry, that's my bad.
Now you're even cost. I mean, Luis.
Okay.
Make presenter. You should be presenter now.
Now it's okay. Now it's okay.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Sorry for also being late.
Sorry for the delay and the technical issue. I thought that actually we had solved it, but it seems that these software things have always problems. Let's punish actually the engineers who developed me between them at the time. I'm going to offer the easy perspective on open source for the computing continuum. I'm just speaking about the computing continuum because we certainly have got a more wide open source policy for our services organized by the Directorate General of Information Technologies. But I'm going to speak to you about how we see open source from a computing continuum perspective. First of all, I always like to remind the reasons why we're interested in open source. The European Commission is a public administration, and as public administration, what it cares for is the European citizen. And it cares for the European citizen to make sure that European citizens have got freedom and have got the possibilities to actually develop freely in a world with plenty of possibilities. And in this sense, of course, one of the things to be able to have this freedom is to make sure that you have a competitive economy that provides jobs and growth, so that basically European citizens can go and then make use of its freedom as best as they can. And because of that, we are interested in ICT. We are interested in ICT because ICT provides competitiveness to the economy. And by having a competitive economy, we make sure that we are carrying out our duty towards our shareholders, which are the Europeans. And in this sense, well, we know that ICT nowadays are widely used technologies. 94% of the EU enterprises are using fixed broadband. 78% they have a website. They use social media. There are also the Internet of Things being used by enterprises, e-commerce sales, customer relations through Internet. Well, those and through direct phone. Basically, telecommunications are increasing the competitiveness of the European enterprises. But this is not ending here. We see a digital decade, and we have settled very important objectives by 2030. It's no longer just to have access to ICT, but to make sure that we have the state of state-of-the-art ICT that can best provide an efficient economic framework and competitiveness to the economy. And in this sense, we see now how we are speaking about a computing continuum. If 10 years ago we were speaking strongly about cloud computing and how we could actually find services in the cloud, and when we say in the cloud, we mean in central data centers that are somewhere in the world, but not necessarily just in our premises, we see how computation has been spreading through all places throughout Europe, not only in data centers at thousands of kilometers, but also in central offices, also in cells, also in houses, also in the devices that are also having the capacity for computation. We are seeing the computation capabilities spreading throughout, and we no longer speak about cloud computing, but we speak about cloud edge IoT computation. We speak about a computing continuum, and we want to make sure that we have enough of this computation, which includes having relatively powerful edge nodes by 2030 with well, the digital decade objective says that we should have more than 10,000, and that cloud is take by more than 75% of the EU enterprises, which is also because of the fact that cloud computing allows elasticity, flexibility of resources, and more capabilities for the EU enterprises. And here it comes the question of open source. And why are we interested in open source? It's exactly because of the reason of bringing more effectiveness to the European companies. In 2021, in September 2021, we published a study that we had done on the economic impact of open source in the EU economy. Well, certainly, this study confirmed that open source was having a big impact. EU companies were investing more than 1 billion in open source software. But not only that, the cost benefit of investing in open source was about 2 to 4. For every euro, we were getting 4. And an impact, consolidated impact of the open source effort between 65 and 95 billion. What's more, the econometric study demonstrated that there was a positive correlation between the GDP increase and also confirmed causality, that because there was open source, we could actually say that the GDP was included. Actually, when I started working in the European Commission in 2006, there were big ideological fights on whether open source, yes or no, it's going to completely destroy the industry, or no, it's the salvation of the industry. Well, in 2023, and actually due to the result of this study, we regard open source very differently. We see that companies are now considering open source in somewhere in their strategy. You cannot build an ICT company without just thinking not about the open source, not because you want to have an open source model, or because you want to approach the development of your software open source, or because you decide that you're going to give away all the licenses on the software that you own. No, that's not the case. It is because open source somewhere or another, it affects your business case. And what's more, because open source is something that you can use. The study actually identified open source as a public good. And actually, I was reading an article lately about what's different between a common good and a public good. And basically, a public good is a good that everybody can have. What's more, that the fact that I have this book does not impede you to also have this good. It's like a source in a village that provides enough water for everybody. And of course, with this public good that is open source in the ICT sector, you can do whatever you want. Either you build your own company, or you just drink the water of the fountain. It's up to you. The study also demonstrated that there is a need of EU policies if we want that this impact is maximized, and presents certain cases of study cases where while open source is going to reduce the total cost of ownership, and also, of course, it avoids vendor login at the technological level and increases digital autonomy. And it is on the point of digital autonomy that we are putting our effort in the cloud and software unit. Actually, I'm speaking about open source, and everybody's thinking, well, open source software, it has been here, we are using it, but let's speak the reality. In 2023, we not only speak about open source software, we also speak about open source hardware. We speak about 3D printing of parts that are open source. Its code is open source, and you can build them for free. We're speaking about open electronics. We're speaking about open source processors, such as the RISC-V architecture. And when it comes to RISC-V and to open source processors, actually, this is one of the core initiatives that we have concerning open source. We have seen, well, my commissioner is pushing for ensuring that Europe is digitally autonomous. That doesn't mean that Europe has to act in isolation, but it means that Europe must have the tools to ensure that it can act autonomously if this is required. And when we come to cloud computing, to act autonomous if this is required means that we can build our own cloud computing infrastructure with European technology. Well, and certainly with European technology, that means that we have to have European technology for every layer on the ICT continuum. The open source communities have managed to build all the layers from the kernel up to the application. However, below the kernel, it's still closed. And it comes here the possibility to actually say, well, why don't we also open up the other part so that there is effective competition and that there are more vendors, including Europeans, who can come and participate. Well, actually, if we go down, well, we find the processor, and if we find the processor, then we have to have actually open source technologies for supporting the processor. And it is here where the results of the relevant European initiatives come in. The results of the European Processor Initiative, which included public and private participation, is a possibility to bring more openness to the different computing layers. And RISC-V could perfectly power digital autonomous European cloud infrastructures. Of course, it's not the only technology, but it's a possibility. And also, when it comes to speaking about specific ISAs, we speak also about specific electronics. We speak about open source processor sockets for cloud infrastructures that could help bring more competitiveness to the European economy. But okay, we're speaking about open source processors, but it's not only the thing. We're not forgetting that open source software is also used for cloud services and applications. We are calling continuously on open source projects, and we are calling on software engineering processes. What's also true is that the Research Framework Program is producing tons of software. Well, tons, of course, it's something intangible, but metaphorically speaking. And what is also true is that the vast majority of the software that is produced, if not practically all, under the Research Framework Program is usually licensed under open source licenses. Also, we see that there are research gaps in open source, horizontal scalability, cognitive computing, and also that the open source cloud ecosystem is something to make sure that it engages the new policy initiatives such as the Data Act. In fact, we finance a lot the computing continuum. We have put more than 250 million euros between 21 and 24 in different computing continuum activities, including cognitive cloud, such as, for example, for AI Sprint, and before, during the Horizon 2020. We are also financing open source for cloud-based services. We are also financing open source for digital autonomy. And we are making sure that actually we can rely on the best tools to ensure that there is an active economy in the computing continuum. Just let me bring you some information on precisely what we're speaking about open source processors. We are speaking about an ICT market of more than 43 billion euros. But come on, this market would not exist unless you didn't have a base, the base of the semiconductors. But it's not only the semiconductors that have to be in order to make sure that we have cloud services. We have to make sure that the semiconductors are transformed into components, then into modules, and then finally into cloud systems. We are also seeing that we are the biggest market for specific semiconductors. It's obvious that if you build processors, well, computing has to be one of the main ones. And our open source efforts in this domain are precisely on the way on how to bridge from semiconductors to systems and how to make sure that the components are integrated into new cloud systems. And having said this, I will also express my gratitude to AI Sprint for bringing one thing that is in the upper layer of this cloud computing layers, which is the fact that you're actually integrating artificial intelligence, which are new, which is now the new technology, to make sure that we have vibrant applications in the computing. And actually, the combination of artificial intelligence and cloud computing is what we believe, what we know as cognitive clouds, which are meant to revolutionize what is today's landscape. And of course, there will be plenty of open source that will help to avoid redoing the wheel, to avoid reinventing things that are already there, because basically they are already a public good that can be accessed by all. Thank you very much for your attention, Danilo.
And thank you very much for your presentation, Luis. Are there any questions from the
yeah, maybe I have one. Thanks for also for providing an overview of what's coming next in the next program, actually. And my question is, you mentioned also the API initiative. So do you have an estimate of what will be the timeline of the European processor, actually?
Well, actually, the API initiative, it's already finished. Now we are in the API version 2. The API has already resulted in 2 processors, which are actually being integrated actively by the results of the open source for cloud services. Specifically, I'll mention the project Riser, which is actually the project Riser, which is actually saying that they will have a server based on RISC-V by the end of this year. This was in June, so it's now less than 3 months that we will be able to have open source services based on RISC-V. Now, the next version of the API, it's actually developing new processors with, if the first version of the API had got only ARM and RISC, the second version will be basically RISC-V. and these processors will take a little longer, probably during 2024. And the next myriad of open source cloud to edge support will actually take them into account to make sure that we can not only provide cloud servers, but also edge computing with open source hardware inside.
Thanks a lot, Luis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no more questions, I think we can move on to our next speaker. I guess we need to switch the presenter again so that you can show slides.
Yes, you should be able to, Gael. Thank you.
Okay, and our next speaker is another prominent promoter of, over many years, of open source in Europe. It is Gael Bondel of the Eclipse Foundation, well known in Europe, and he will present us insights from Eclipse Foundation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I see you can see my slides, and I hope that you hear me well.
Yes.
So, well, thanks. First of all, thanks for the invitation. I'm sorry to not be with you, but well, too many travels this week. So yeah, I will tell you about our point of view about open source as an open source foundation, and I will also speak from the point of view of the EU Cloud Edge IoT initiative, because we are a partner in it. And there's a task force too, which is about open source in the edge to cloud continuum. And well, you can go to the website, you can join the task force. We are about to launch a survey about open source in the cloud to edge continuum. And we would love to listen to your thought about this topic. But first of all, and maybe that's obvious for most of you, but I always like to start with just two slides about what we mean by open source, and Luis mentioned it a bit, but that all started with Richard Stallman and with the definition of free software a long time ago now, and really the fundamental topic is that open source or free software. Let's start with free software. Is software that gives you the freedom to run it for any purpose, to study how it works, to modify the software, and to redistribute copies of the software and of your modifications. And that's I think still very important. Everything that doesn't comply with that is likely not open source, because open source was, well, 25 years ago, we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of the open source initiative. Was really a new word put on the free software movement to be able to speak better to businesses and to promote free software without using the word free, which is ambiguous in English, because it means free as you have the freedoms, and free as it's no cost. And that's the point is not that it's really about the freedom, not about the no cost. But my next point is also something that is very important from my point of view, is that I think that in the room you have lots of researchers, developers, and it's really important to keep in mind that open source is a way of managing intellectual property for software. And Luis was mentioning that, okay, we have also 3D printing and open hardware, etc. So that's extending to other domains. But the beauty of open source is that the author of a project decides to publish the software under a specific license. The user can consume the software under this license. And what's really cool is that the license is short. It's usually not longer than 2 pages, and it's understood everywhere in the world in a similar way. So that's something that makes collaboration in software much easier to implement. I come back to that. And when you consider software licensing, you have a large spectrum of options. And and software licensing is an art, and I personally think that it's a very important activity. Not when you are a developer, but as soon as you start thinking about doing business with software, because it's not that everything should be open source or nothing should be open source. I think that there is open source in every software nowadays, and in every product more or less. But we should keep in mind that proprietary licenses are not necessarily easier than open source licenses because they all come with their own limitations and can be incompatible. And also, we should keep in mind that public domain and non-commercial licenses are not open source because they break the first freedom to use the software for what you want. I put a link on this slide to the JoinUp licensing assistant, which is a very useful website from the European Commission. I use it a lot when I need to explain or to compare different licenses. That's a super useful resource, and I think you should bookmark this resource. And when you talk about licensing and open source licenses themselves, it's important to keep in mind that at the beginning, a lot of stuff was in GPL, but more and more open source software are licensed under a permissive license. And there's a good reason for that, is that because it helps with collaboration. I think that if you publish a software under the Apache, the BSD or MIT license, and if you want to set up a collaboration between a university and a company, it's likely that the company will feel comfortable with those licenses and will not raise any issue. So that's an important aspect. And of course, we like the Eclipse public license a lot, but well, at the Eclipse Foundation now, we accept more or less every kind of open source license when there is a good reason to use them. But the reality is that most of the time, we have new project proposals that are using permissive licenses. But I could spend a long time on this slide, and I'm happy to answer any questions about licensing afterward by email. Or let's move to the role of an open source foundation and why it can be useful. In fact, the role of the Eclipse Foundation is to enable sustainable, vendor-neutral, open collaboration. You can think about open source as there are mainly three ways of doing open source. The basic way of publishing open source software is to push code on GitHub, which is what a lot of people do, and you have millions and even hundreds of millions of repositories on GitHub. That's just publishing code. That's not really useful because open source is more than just public code. That's having a community, being able to have a fruitful collaboration, etc. So you have a lot more to do than just publishing the code. There is also single vendor open source, which is an activity that is usually done by startups from the Silicon Valley. And recently, you may have heard about Elastic, for example, or HashiCorp, and the fact that last month, I think, or 2 months ago, HashiCorp decided that Terraform would not be open source anymore, or that their version of it would not be open source anymore. That's something that to keep in mind when you want to contribute or to use a single vendor open source project, is that at some point it may not be open source anymore. And there is open source hosted by foundations, and it is really different because we are a non-profit organization, and deep in our bylaws there are our values of openness, transparency, and vendor neutrality. So we have everything oriented towards implementing this kind of collaborative open source. How do we do that? So first of all, we think that our role is to help people collaborate on open source platforms. And we think that it's a good sign if the community is building products on top of the platform, because when there are products based on an open source platform, it means that there are economic actors who have incentive to maintain the platform and make it sustainable. And to do that, we provide several services. So the first one, and maybe I will spend a bit more time on that one, is open source governance. And community governance and processes is really, we have documentation and processes and also people to enforce the processes to answer questions like who can commit code to the project? Who can contribute code to the project? How can an external contributor become a committer? So somebody with the full rights on the project repositories. How to accept or reject external contributions. How to define what features to implement. You see, that's not the kind of questions you may ask yourself when you are in an early research phase. But when you reach the point of having an open source platform, that's something that becomes more important. And we have IP management, we have ecosystem development, which is how to grow a community. And more recently, we are investing in supply chain security because that's a new hot topic in open source. How does it translate in the research ecosystem? So our vision is really that open source should be a catalyst for research projects, for dissemination and exploitation. So the idea is that you can use open source as a common collaboration framework for researchers, for large organizations, for smaller organizations. And because of the unique collaboration nature of open source, each actor can collaborate according to, well, their expectations, their own goals, their agility, their velocity, and to progress, to make this open source platform progress. And that's also where permissive licensing is important. Now I want to just end with 3 takeaways. So first one is that there is already open source happening in lots of technology domains. So like Luis was mentioning, there is tons of open source in IoT and edge, in AI, in cloud and distributed ledger technologies. More is coming in the industry 4.0. So that's really that. 20 years ago, when I started in open source was about commoditization. So that was the moment when we were replacing proprietary databases by open source databases like MySQL or PostgreSQL. And now, every new domain, as soon as the domain appears, there are open source frameworks that appear and that become very successful. The second topic is that open source AI needs a definition. The open source definition was built 25 years ago. We are celebrating the 25th anniversary, and that's still used. And we are at this moment when everybody wants to do open source because it's cool. But Yamato, for example, is not open source. It's very well explained in a blog post by the Open Source Initiative. And I want to emphasize an initiative by Stefano Maffuli, who is the executive director of the Open Source Initiative. And 18 months ago, he started working on the topic of defining open source AI. And next week, the Open Source Initiative will publish a draft definition of open source AI that will still be open for comments. So I suspect that we have lots of AI experts in the room. So you should go to this website and you can check the timeline and see how to contribute to making this definition even better. And my last point is that I always take opportunities like this one to explain how I see open source as a vector of leadership for Europe. I'm a French guy living in Toulouse. I have always lived in Europe, and I think that as researchers, you can publish your code on GitHub or GitLab. We discussed that. That's nice. That's not necessarily super useful, but that's a first step. You can also contribute to open source projects, and in terms of digital autonomy or digital sovereignty, whatever you want to call it, that's important, in my opinion, to train people in Europe who are able to use, study, modify, and redistribute the software, the open source software that are important for Europe. So contributing is already a very important step. And the next step is when you create new technologies, there is really an opportunity to use open source and the network effect of open source to boost adoption of your technologies. I have just maybe two examples. When we were all doing SOAP 20 years ago in the good days of service-oriented architecture, REST appeared, and that was a PhD thesis. And the ecosystem moved to do REST, and yeah, well, also because it was easy to do it with open source, etc. Kubernetes, it was created by a team of 5-6 people. And what's interesting is that, of course, you had the core developers, but in the core team, at the very beginning, there was one person who was specialized in the development of open source community. So that really this mix, and a lot more, I don't have time to tell you the story, but that made Kubernetes successful. But it was, you should not think that initially the team was 100 people or something like that. That's not true. And in Europe, I think that scikit-learn is really an interesting case of a leading open source platform that is successful in open source, and that was published by INRIA. So my point and my conclusion is that using open source is a big opportunity, and so we should not be shy in our open source approach, but we should be proud of publishing code and leading with open source. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Gail. Any questions from the audience?
Maybe I have one. Gail, thanks for joining us. My question is related, of course, we have an interest in open source for AI. And I would like to understand, in your experience, what's the relation? Because there are several levels, I think, because we have open AI frameworks like, I don't know, TensorFlow, PyTorch, and so on. That's one level. Then when we move to AI, there is an interest in the model. So there are some models where we know the structures, we know the weights, we know the parameters, we know all. But then how far these go? Because we might have also the need for having access to the training data. So in your experience, what I think there are also some open data sets. And so in your experience, if you can comment on this relation between the software, the models, and the data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good topic. So yeah, the point with AI is that the software by itself is not the biggest part of it. That's really the data sets and the training so there's the parameters and the training data sets. And that's exactly the points that the open source initiative is trying to put in their open source AI definition. I think that having the open source software, having the software in open source, like you said, it's one thing, and that's an interesting one. But then we all agree that maybe the no field of endeavor restriction of open source doesn't apply to train model, and also maybe we have other problems with the training data, because the training data can have, for example, copyrighted material, etc. And sometimes you want to be able to use this copyrighted material and to avoid being in trouble because your data set includes that. So I'm sorry, I know really a lot about open source. On this open source AI definition task force, I've joined it recently. I'm not the best expert, but really, that's where you will find answer to this question.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thanks. Now I'd like to move on to the person who's preventing this from being a webinar, which is Giovanni Agosta, our live speaker, who you can, from the real world, who you can look at now. And he will speak about his experience in the Isolde project, which is a project which involves the RISC-V also. So, leveraging open source, Isolde's perspective. Giovanni, the floor is yours.
Okay, can you hear me?
Oh. I can.
Yes, now you can almost see my slides. So we are almost there. Okay, so thanks for the invitation. I'm Giovanni Agosta. I represent here the Isolde consortium, which is a consortium that works on high technology readiness level project in the field of open source hardware and the corresponding open source system software. Okay, let me skip the consortium itself. It's as usual very large, but the idea is that what we have seen before, the European Processor Initiative has produced some chips, but these are not sufficient to drive a wide range of different applications. The reason is a chip typically provides general purpose capabilities, but then needs to be coupled with heterogeneous accelerators in order to cope with the needs of specific applications. So we need to mature the existing solutions, which are mostly at the chip level, to add all the interfacing that is needed to add a variety of different other components, particularly accelerators, and also mature the corresponding software tool chains. And this is more or less the concept. We are going to build over a set of foundation cores, which include they are basically all open source cores, together with newly developed domain-specific accelerators. And the system software that is built around this kind of systems. For which kind of applications? Well, we do have a wide range of applications, but I would like to point out that we do have in this project a space use case, which for open hardware, which is a relatively recent movement, it's quite an achievement, because as you know, space applications typically take a very long time for technology maturation. So the fact that relevant players in the space field, like Leonardo, Thales Alenia Space, invest in this kind of development means that there is space, there is room for open source technologies also in these challenging domains. The core idea is to use the CVA6, which is one of the open hardware group cores, particularly a dual core, interfaced with a range of external accelerators. Okay. What do we want to accelerate? Well, there is a need to accelerate a range of different problems, but a key issue for future architectures will be to accelerate AI processing, so machine learning, inference, this kind of systems, which, when seen from the bottom, so we look from the hardware up, what we see is typically matrix multiplications, which need, therefore, dedicated architecture with typically are of the systolic type, so where we are performing in parallel a wide amount of different operations on different data with high bandwidth. Let's look also at the software, because from the software side, even if we have an open hardware, then we can't use any hardware unless we have a sufficiently production-grade tool chain that enables this hardware. There is a significant fragmentation in the AI market. There are many tools, many of them are also open source. So what we need is to be able to use a tool chain where we can plug in components that perform the same kind of steps, but they are tailored for different usages. The goal of Isolde in this field is to use MLIR and LLVM. So LLVM is a compiler framework, and MLIR is a way to develop representations for intermediate representations for different kind of programs. In this case, the program is a set of operations that are derived from our neural networks, using open standards for interfacing different tools such as ONNX, and using open tools at the compiler level to build the whole tool chain. I think this is essentially all for the overall presentation of what Isolde is. What is the status of Isolde today? We are at the beginning, actually, of the project. The first 6 months are just ended, so specifications and requirements. And what we are building now is the steps of integration between different open source techniques. Let me give you a quick examples. We all know that, for instance, direct memory accesses are a way to optimize the access of highly parallel accelerators to data. However, we know almost nothing about how these very common tools interact with other optimization at the software level, and this is what we are investigating. We are investigating how a DMA access interoperates with transformations on the code that change the type of operations that are performed on the data and the type of the data themselves, thus reducing or increasing the amount of data that are transferred at every cycle. I would say that the perspectives for Isolde and for us in general are pretty good, and the majority of the technologies will be released as open source. That is because there is a pipeline of different projects. We inherit things from tools, technologies from other projects like Tristan, which is, let's say, brother of Isolde. It's a project that started 1 year earlier and produces open source hardware components that then we are using to build our systems. So this allows also to pipeline in a tighter way different European projects and produce a faster maturation towards high technology readiness levels. Thanks. Thank you.
There's time for a question if there's any questions from the online or offline.
Yeah, maybe
audience.
I raise questions. I'm the guy of questions this session. Giampaolo, I think I know your work, but I think that's a very interesting story, actually. The thing really having also an holistic perspective from the application to the accelerator, and you mentioned also sometime FPGA and so on. I think really there is a huge challenge for optimizing this kind of system, right?
Yes,
can you comment briefly in 1 minute?
That's the next challenge. So here in Isolde, we are mostly focusing on the low levels of the tool chain. So starting from the neural network down to the hardware. But there is also a correlated problem that is how to build a representation of the network, how to prune the network, how to transform it so that it is amenable to the particular type of architecture and constraints of the architecture that you have, particularly in embedded AI. You need to be careful with your networks and the optimization may happen at a very high level.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And thank you from me also. We now move on to our last speaker of the session. It was Ruth, who I believe I've seen online. So,
yeah, Ruth, do you want to share your screen directly, or you want me to go through your slide?
I think I can try to share. Okay.
Yes, you should be presenter now.
So can you see it?
Ruta is from Fortis, and she will give us insights from the Codeco project, which you can see here. Ruth, go ahead.
Okay, so hi everybody. I'm really sorry that I did not make it to Milan. I actually was on another meeting yesterday, so that prevented me from traveling in Amsterdam. So I'm going to speak about Codeco, who is one of the new projects in the continuum topics. And so not so new, so we are already on our 9th month. Codeco focuses on as the name says, okay, on the decentralization of the orchestration aspects across Edge Cloud. And what I'm going to do today is actually give you a brief explanation on what we are doing, what is really Codeco, but then also explain what we are doing in terms of open source software. So since the proposal, our vision for the edge to cloud orchestration was that in order to be able to support new environments that we have, so mobile, as was just mentioned, satellite environments, we need to take a look and to integrate context that comes from different layers. So that comes from different perspectives, from the user, but also from the data workflow, from the networking part, and from the computational part. And actually today, most of the tools that we have for orchestration are focused on optimizing, be it in terms of latency or in terms of energy, the computational adaptive aspects with cognition, so with AI and machine learning. So the reason why we decided to do this was because to the consortium of Codeco, we believe that in the upcoming future, in particular if we look into 6G use cases, the key challenges that we will have relate with mobility and high portability of applications, and also with the fact that we will have mobile dense environments. And so for that, the infrastructure that is going to support these new applications needs to be more clever, of course, cognitive, as a lot of us are analyzing and researching, but also needs to be able to self-adapt and to self-heal. And for that, we need to pass, in addition to information about the applications, we need to pass some information about the context where those applications are running. So this is basically, let's say, the core aspect in Codeco. I would say that in terms of orchestration and compared to other approaches that we have, so we focus on the softwareization aspects, but we work on a combined approach, this data compute network orchestration. So in terms of assets, and also linking this to the open source aspect, so Codeco is full open source. So we have agreed during the proposal with industrial partners and the academic and research partners to go and to build a complete open source framework, being the reason that, so on my case, okay, coordinating this project and also coming from the research part, I believe that's the only way to truly contribute with something more meaningful than just a bunch of code that stays in a repository. And so if you take a look into our assets, you will see that we have, of course, like any other project, open toolkits and smart apps. We also have an asset that we say it is an asset, which is an Eclipse open source repository, already open and with an early release of code that we are handling right now, so since July. And then we are proposing also, of course, use cases like any other European project, but also training database. And more important, in my opinion, is also the creation of an open experimental framework. So here we are not looking into yet another infrastructure where we can test Codeco developed by the consortium, but in fact we are looking into existing infrastructures that we have for the Edge Cloud continuum. One of them is EdgeNet. that has some advantages. So what we want to do there is actually to integrate the Codeco components in this infrastructure so that the research community and the industry community can experiment with Codeco as soon as we release, let's say, the first release, which should be around June 2024. So the reason to do this, as I said, it allows us to, of course, we have our own infrastructure and to do our system integration, but we also believe that if we do this at an early stage and identify some environment where Codeco can run, then we can attract and create a better open source community. So we have 6 use cases, as you see. The use cases have specific core partners. Some of them are being deployed already in cooperation with operational environments, such as with the University of Göttingen and the city of Göttingen, or with ETUCAT and an attempt to add this in Barcelona. Others are, of course, lab-based or campus-based. But as you see, so what we are trying to do with use cases is, as usual, we have this framework, software-based, and we are trying to apply it to specific environments to support next-generation applications. So let me give you, before I speak about the open source aspects and community, let me give you a more technical overview on what we are doing. On the left-hand side, on this slide, you have the basis of the Codeco, which means we believe that, so we focus on applications, as said, orchestration, in particular, containerized applications. So this means we believe that the applications in the future, as is already happening, due to the need of portability and mobility of the environments, requires strong virtualization. One potential technology for that is, of course, Docker, okay, containers, or similar. Therefore, that's where we have focused. And why did we focus there and did not use a more, let's say, theoretical approach? Because we wanted to, as I said, we made also a bet in releasing open source code. And so for that, we need a more agile and operational approach that allows us to reach a TRL5, so high level of innovation, but also to give something to the community that is really usable. So what is new in Codeco, in addition to the adaptability aspects related with cognition, so integration of decentralized or beyond federated learning models, is actually the use of context, what we call context awareness, and how we define it. You see on the left-hand side that we inject into the system parameters that come from the data workflow, from the application, from the user behavior and context, for instance, a worker in a factory, or somebody in a smart city or in a health environment, and also network parameters, so network awareness. And on the right-hand side, you have an example, a high-level example on why we think this would be beneficial. So for instance, you have on Edge one a set of users, and you see that we speak about mobility estimation and adaptation. And so the mobility estimation of the user could be a worker moving from in a factory, moving from one place to the other, is actually considered context. So what we want is to inject that information into the learning process so that we can forecast some required adaptation and then ask a scheduler to do placement or new placement of the applications or components or parts of the containerized applications. So the way we are doing this, as I explained, we have just finished our 9th month, and Codeco has been set so that we would set up, in terms of code, the Codeco operation across a single cluster, so very simple thing, but of course it allows us to, so it's not where I would say the key research breakthroughs will be, with the exception of zero configuration. So for instance, for the decentralized learning, the multi-cluster environments are far more interesting, and the federated clusters are far more interesting. But we decided that we wanted to release the code early to the community. Therefore, the first 18 months of the project are dedicated to the operation in a single cluster, and the last 18 months to the operation across federated clusters. This does not mean that we don't take a look or we don't work with concepts already for federated clusters. It just means that from a software integration, development, and so on, we will take those considerations later. Okay, so we will add them later. So in order to achieve this, we have created a modular architecture, software architecture, you see on the right-hand side the key components of Codeco. Each of the boxes is a software-based component that integrates other subcomponents, of course, and you also see on the right-hand side where they are from noisy layer perspective. Okay, so for instance, the networking part, of course, relates with the adaptation of the overlay that we have in clusters. And then we have, for instance, an interface to the user, the ACM, automated configuration management and security. The core of the orchestration environment is provided by the privacy-preserving decentralized learning and context awareness component. And then we have the scheduling, the workload, migration and placement decision, so the optimization process, the multi-optimization process on another component. We also have a component, the metadata manager, that actually brings, let's say, the data workflow into the picture. So it can give us, for instance, information about compliance aspects that we have to do configuration to do an adaptation of the infrastructure. So the status, where are we now? We have released already a high-level design of the architecture. What you see on this slide are actually the Codeco components now with more detail. So the report provides you with full detail about our choices on design, the key technologies, open source technologies that we are using, and also why. Okay, why are we decide to go that? And also technological boundaries. Okay, so what does Codeco do on promises and what it will not cover because it cannot. So as you see here, so one of the things that I believe, I'm not sure if I mentioned, of course, is that operationally for us, the key orchestrator is Kubernetes. So Codeco will be a set of, let's say, plugins that we interconnect with Kubernetes. So for instance, if a user wants to use Codeco, it's not that the user will have to install any of these plugins. So from a software architecture perspective, there's a component, ACM, that will handle and hide, let's say, the Codeco to the developer, to the user deploying applications. So in terms of open source, we have these toolkits. There is already an early release, so you can try some basic sub-components, not the components of Codeco and not Codeco. I will give some examples on the next slide. But basically, we count with Eclipse Foundation as one of the partners in the project to help us in building a meaningful experience that goes beyond the usual research-oriented repositories in GitLab or GitHub. So you see here the key aspects that we are currently developing to be able, or to try, we hope, okay, to try to have Codeco really being used by the community and also contributions at an early stage. So for that, Eclipse has proposed to do the actions that you see here. So we have landscaping activities. On the left-hand side, okay, we have also community building activities. There is a specific program tailored, so we call it Research and Innovation Community Engagement Program. So these are not open calls. This is really an engagement program for the research community from an industry perspective and also from an academic perspective that will be started in a couple of months. And that will help us, for instance, in developing the community with demo camps, hackathons, and so on, regular approaches, but in a more coordinated way because we count with Eclipse. Okay, so this was my last slide. What can you then do? If you go to the, so I'm going to go back. If you go to the Eclipse repository, you'll see that we already have some basic software. For instance, we have a data generator for the infrastructure aspect that is tailored to an adaptation of metrics that we have decided are the basic to be collected across networking, user, application. You have also already an example on how Codeco looks to the developer. So this is ACM component. And you have also, or will soon have, so until the end of October, some components about the use of MARL and GNNs to help, so to test how the forecasting would work to assist in the placement approach. So thank you.
Thank you, Rute. So I have time, I think, for a very short and quick question. So you are, Codeco is part of the project that have been funded in the wave where AI is not only, I mean, for Sprint, the AI is the target application. In Codeco, you have, while vice versa, you are using AI for managing the edge cloud continuum. So I've seen that you use machine learning for prediction. I was wondering if you use also reinforcement learning techniques for coping with decisions with the pure, I mean, reinforcement learning approaches. What are you doing? In 30 seconds.
Yeah, we are. So basically, as you say, we are using it to do forecasting, of course. So basically, assuming we have this infrastructure and our scheduler, who is based on a solver, okay, graph approach based solver. So it's not a regular Kubernetes approach, a filter and scoring. So if there is, for instance, a decision to do some placement, but now, so as you know, Kubernetes is very static. So it means that it does not expect the infrastructure to change over a significant period of time. But if we are now on these environments a little bit more mobile, AGV, fleets, etc., then it means that the infrastructure, so the networking part, will change frequently or is expected to vary. And so this means that, for instance, if the scheduler decides to do a placement of an application, maybe not just because memory is out or CPU is out, but maybe because it seems that in terms of energy, the optimization, so energy use, the optimization would be better, then so what happens is that we use forecasting. So we have, let's say, this engine based on AI, in particular decentralized AI, because it runs across all these components, worker nodes, and also the control plane. So we use it, of course, to forecast, and that has some weight, okay, so helps us in the scheduler to do a decision, but it's not the core of the decision. So it's like an informed decision. Okay, it's like saying to the scheduler, okay, if you use this node, that is the impact that we think you will have because we are looking into history, okay? And we use reinforced learning or forms so that the scheduler can also inform the orchestrator, okay, about what happened. Okay, so I did this placement and here's the cost. Okay, so we are indeed using reinforced learning or trying to in the beginning. So right now we just have some analysis, okay, on decentralized learning approaches and the cost that we have for the placement.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for participating. Yeah, now we move to the very last session, which is devoted for our roundtable of experts. So I invite all the experts to join us here on the podium. And yeah, this will be moderated by John, this one too.
Thank you. Okay. Everybody have a well, we see who's here. Who's not here? So it's Carlos is online. Yeah. So let's see somewhere.
Okay, everybody have their speaker name there? Okay, all right, fine. So welcome to the final session of today's event. It's a panel session. We have a very diverse panel of experts here who can give us a lot of different perspectives on pioneering AI and innovation. So several we've already heard from today, but we are welcoming some specifically for this panel, so I would like to introduce them. Pavel Bochniarts, maybe you should just raise your hand, I don't know. Yes, is a member of our expert advisory board, and he's a venture capital executive who invests in early stage deep tech startups. So Pavel will give us insights on the transformation of AI innovation into, well, companies with an impact. Professor Juan Carlos Nieves Sanchez of Umea University is joining us in remote today. I hope you're with us. Yes, I see you there.
Yes, I can hear you. I hope you can hear me.
Welcome. He is also a member of our expert advisory board, and he is a founding member of the AI Doctoral Academy and the Taylor Network of European AI Actors. And Professor Matteo Matteucci, well, you've seen around all day, and he was actually sitting up here at one point and then disappeared again. He's the deputy coordinator of AI Sprint, and well, he's made several important research contributions to the project, among them federated machine learning results. And Anna Escoda of the Barcelona Supercomputing Center is with us today and is an expert in BSc on technology transfer. And she can tell us about their experiences with various kinds of public spin-offs and private startups that they are dealing with. Sitting right next to me is Patrick Thiem, who I suppose many or most of you know, who is with Cloud and Heat and who's the cloud providing partner in the AI Sprint consortium and the managing partner of the AI Sprint Alliance. And of course, we'd like to welcome back to the panel Georgia, who was our very first speaker from IDC. And Giovanni Agosto, well, he just stayed put after the last session. He is both a professor at Polyme and an expert, of course, as you know, in RISC-V also. And Fabrizio Magliani of the E4 company, who he spoke to us during the testimonials session. And I believe that Tommaso was not able to be with us today. So in any case, we're welcome to all of you. We are looking forward to your insights. In fact, I would like to take the opportunity of this panel to come back to certain topics that were, well, either mentioned or hinted at or even just implied during the early sessions, but weren't really discussed at much length. So the rules for this panel are simple. There are no rules. That is, speakers are free to let me know if they have something they would like to add a comment to or something like that. And the audience is free at any time just to raise their hand and say, hey, I want to ask this question, or I don't agree with something this guy said, or something like that. Okay, so we have to start somewhere. And I thought I would start with the very first thing that you said this morning, which is about that everybody knows about the cloud. Everybody knows about it. And it was also more or less the first thing that Danilo said, was that much of AI is really about getting the entire thing around it working and not just the ML itself. So let's just start with the cloud, and let's start with Fabrizio. Coming over the last 5 or 10 years or so, what has made the cloud grow so much? What are the key technologies that have made the cloud become so important?
Thanks for asking. I was in the business when there was another term for the cloud, which was grid computing. Some of you may remember it. There were a lot of good things and bad things in this concept. I think that the driving force behind the cloud is the rise of the hyperscalers. So big, large system available for a fraction of the cost of a system installed at the user premises, and with a lot of basically free CPU core time for users. I don't see any problem with the network, because a large number of people I knew were worried about data protection, GDPR and something else, but this concern has been fading away. So from replying to your question, the rise of the hyperscalers at a very low price for me has been the key factor to convince a larger and larger number of people to join the cloud.
Thanks. That makes a lot of sense. Let's stay with the cloud and go to our cloud provider, who is Patrick. And this is my opportunity to come to something that was has been talked about. It was talked about at the very beginning in Stefano's presentation from the EC. He talked about sustainability, and he talked about saving energy, things like that, but we never really came back to it, and certainly not in terms of the cloud, and you are heavily involved in this. So what are the requirements on cloud providers, and what are you doing about it? What are the problems associated with these AI workloads you're getting?
Yeah, I see. Especially in terms of sustainability and environmental restrictions and energy reduction. So there are 5 aspects that we see at Cloud and Heat. That is the ethical aspect, that every cloud provider should be aware that we, from now on, actively need to fight the climate change, and also we need to meet certain carbon emission targets and lower our carbon footprint in general. And from a strategic perspective, we also see that the customers are more and more facing sustainability and want to also reduce their costs of energy and want to achieve a cost reduction in that. So what's also very important is the regulatory aspect. Meaning, especially in Germany, there's a new law, for example, for energy efficiency for data centers. So in this law, some points like waste heat recovery, waste heat usage, like we do at Cloud and Heat already, and also the usage of renewable energy and to optimize the power usage effectiveness are very important points there, and we think that it's the right step in that direction to regulate, because until now there hasn't been that much of improvement in the sector of data centers in sustainability, and if there's no movement, then it kind of needs to be a bit forced, but it's always a bit tricky to say, yeah, force such improvements by regulatory aspects, but we see it as necessary right now. And also some ecological aspects as well, with more efficient energy usage. The costs can be lowered significantly, and we have white papers already on our website. You can look it up at Cloud and Heat, where experts from us calculated some numbers. If you lower your energy usage, then you can significantly lower also your costs. That's also one aspect. And last but not least, the technologies are very important, software and hardware wise. So we need to stay up to date to achieve best sustainability. That's our 5 aspects of sustainability in the data center market.
Regarding I know there are AI Sprint initiatives like Kraka, which can you explain some scenarios or details on how Kraka can help to reduce environmental impacts in heavy computational workloads?
Oh yeah, sure. So imagine so Kraka is there for distributing workloads across multiple heterogeneous data centers, for example, also on the edge, focused on heavy AI workloads also. And imagine something like that. You have a wind park, you have a solar park, and maybe even a big building which needs to be heated. And with Kraka, you could achieve that you put the AI workloads always there where there is, for example, the most renewable energy in solar power, or the most energy in wind power, or even the most heat needed right now to heat up the buildings, like in Norway or Sweden or something like that. you need to also mention here that you need data centers in the near of such buildings, wind parks and solar parks, that's for sure. But yeah, that would be our approach.
Yeah, go ahead, Fabrizio.
I totally agree with what has been said up to now. We have to be a bit careful because sustainability means thousands of things to thousands of people. Okay, so having a data center in Norway or having in Spain is more sustainable than Spain or the Finnish data center. How you measure it? How you measure how much water are you using? How much measure the sustainability of the landscape that you are using? I mean, I'm struggling when somebody's talking to me about sustainability. What does it mean? What do you count in sustainability?
Yeah, sure. For sustainability itself, there are really a lot of factors that you need to account for. And so we ourselves are not building in each country the data centers, but we are helping people to build their data centers. So that is also something I think needs to be regulated somehow, maybe. That, as you said, or put more research into it, as you said, that you cannot build a data center anywhere you like. And there's a question in...
well, actually, that's strange because I was on the verge of calling on Juan Carlos, and he has already raised his hand.
Yes,
So,
I think I would like to follow up this question, this point regarding sustainability and data centers. Maybe you know that in the north of Sweden, and we have a data center from Facebook, indeed. One of the reasons that they put it there is because they suppose it's a cheaper production of electricity. And also since the climate is cold, it's more easy to cool down the data center. Nevertheless, I have to say that also they are pushing warm air to the environment. So that means that, who knows, right? Also, we don't know really the effect of pushing warm air to the environment. So maybe it also comes with effects in climate change as well. So it's interesting to think about where is sustainability from the economical perspective or also from the environmental perspective as well.
well, in fact, this is, I feel this is very much related to the whole question of European values, and it gets us into the discussion of the ethical challenge. Can you tell us more about what's going on there on that front in Europe?
Yeah, I think, well, we know since around 2018, you know that the European Commission created this high-level expert group, to say, let's see how we can produce more trustworthy AI. And basically what they did, it was, let's try to be more aware of human rights. And they identify some principles, right? And basically, if we have a look at the guidelines for trustworthy AI, they call for 7 principles. There are several principles, but one of them is sustainability, privacy, human agency, and so on. But nevertheless, one of the tricky parts that comes there is how we can operationalize these ethical principles, and also how we make the people aware about these ethical principles. Many of us, it's hard to identify when there is a moral issue, right? Now we are talking about sustainability, but when it's difficult to identify a moral issue. When I like to put a data center there in the north of Sweden because it's cheaper electricity, nevertheless, it could come with an environmental impact. So I think in that respect, I will say one of the tricky parts there is how we should educate our professionals in order to understand the impact of the technology. And when I say educate our professionals, I will say not just professionals in IT, but I think we should educate everyone, we say, any professional in that respect. I think we as individuals, we have a responsibility, but also we have some responsibility as a professionals in our fields. Also, we have a role of responsibility as part of society as a whole. And of course, just let me conclude with that. You might know that also in the coming year, well, in the last year, the Commission published the first draft of the AI Act, and so regulatory framework is coming there. So next year, I'm sure that it will be more official, but I think there's a lot of things how we could be more aware of the implication of technology. And also I have to say that sometimes that even although that we have a AI Act, that's mean a regulatory framework, that doesn't mean that it's ethical, right? Not the same. Many people say that to be law compliance doesn't imply that we could be ethical compliance.
Yes, understood. Yes, very true. Okay, Allora, there is one more aspect related to the cloud that I would like to, that I think was implied this morning, but never really talked about. And it was the first thing, again, you said, George. You said everybody start adopting the cloud, and more people are adopting the edge. Well, it seems to me that this is going to generate a lot more data then. So that brings us into the European data market. And how do you see the impact of this increasing adoption of all of these technologies on the European, the status quo of the European data market? Is it going to accelerate this adoption? And if it will, in what sectors will it do it?
Sorry, I'm going to use your mic here. So there are many ways to answer these questions, and of course, even at looking at the market of data, we are seeing an acceleration of the size of the market. So this is not directly involved in the work that we've done in AI Sprint. But we've done other studies, especially for the European Commission, where we tried to measure the size of, precisely as you say, the market, the data market, the market of data. So it's not about, again, it's the economic value of these data. It's not about the sheer data flows or the amount of data that are exchanged, but it's the size of the market of products and services that are based on data and based on data technologies that are exchanged out there. And we have already seen that it depends. I could, I had some slides here, but I could start again quoting numbers and 64, 65 billion here and there. This is not the point. The point is that one of the major outputs, I would say, of this study that was very much liked by the European Commission is that we have a market of data. We know that this market of data is already worth, and I think I'm not far from the truth if I say 64 billion euros in the EU27. But the point is that this amount of the value of the market in what is now 5 years, 6 years ahead, so 2030, it's going to probably double, or if not more than that. And even more than that, we have, in this study, we have started to create scenarios. So saying, okay, the European Commission is, for example, putting forward a digital agenda, is putting forward a data strategy. Along this data strategy, there are sets of policies, initiatives. You have seen, of course, the Data Act and the Digital Markets Act and so on. Well, what happens if they all implemented in time and all recepted in the different juridical systems without problem? What happens if this is not happens? What happens if this there is I don't know, some black swans or wild cards that happens? Well, now we have war in Ukraine and we have what's going on in the Middle East, etc., etc. So according to these different scenarios, even in the so-called challenge scenario, we couldn't call it the bad scenario because it sounded a bit too negative. We had to invent something like the challenge scenario, right? But even in the challenge scenario, this market of data is booming. Is if not multiplying by 2, is multiplying by 1.5. So the potential is there, and the potential is there. And again, if you want the numbers, I can give them to you, but I don't think this is the case now. Yeah.
Okay. All right, I would like to continue talking about the market, but I think that will bring us into a long discussion. So before doing that, I would like to come back to something else that was talked about a couple of times today and was talked about with much enthusiasm today by Tommaso Ungarello of Luxottica, who talked about educating the next generation of AI researchers for what he's doing. So I would like to hear more from our researchers, our academic researchers here, to know more about this, about what he was doing it in a very specific way. He wanted to have the people trained to do Luxottica eyeglasses. But what are our researchers doing, our professors doing in order to reshape their curricula to ensure that we do train the next generation? Let me start with Juan Carlos, because I know you are involved in the Doctoral Academy. I would like to hear your experience from that. And then I would like to hear from Giovanni and from Matteo on this. Juan Carlos, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you for introducing this topic. Well, I can share that I was working with the Erasmus Plus project about AI. And the idea was that how we could bring more these topics, so AI ethics in our education. So what we learned is that, for instance, the topic of ethics is not new in different fields, right? And I mean, in medicine, in philosophy, in education and ethics, it's been there, right, for a while. What we learned is that although it's there, these topics are not connected to technology, ethics. So that means we need to be more explicit in the learning outcomes when we design our education, to be more explicit regarding AI ethics education. Another thing that we learn a lot is that most of the times when these topics comes to the courses, comes in a bottom-up way. What I say bottom-up way is because basically the teachers are interested in the topics, they see the relevance that these topics should bring to the students and the professionals, but there is not too much funding from the national agencies. There is a lack of resources there. So, and also, the thing to realize there is that really it's hard to find specialists in the topics. There are people, like we are working for years on AI. There are people for social sciences has been working for years in ethics. So there is really just a few people who are connecting the two fields. So in a few words, I would say that there is a need to evaluate our programs in order to introduce topics in a explicit way. And also I would say that there is a need for teaching material about these topics. And I think this kind of topic should be covered, as I said before in my previous intervention. This kind of education should go in a wide perspective. It's not just for IT people, it should be for all the professional sectors, because most of the cases we have to understand the limitations of technology, right? We need lawyers that need to introduce new regulations, maybe, but we need the real limitations of technology.
Thank you. Giovanni, can you give us your reactions and your impressions on how you see what the future needs to be in?
Yes. So I think that what was said is a pretty good view at the overall level, and probably Matteo will discuss more in detail topics that are related to the AI education. So let me cover a sort of middle ground that deals more with the open source aspect.
Sure.
So in open source, what Gael said before, the very important thing is community. So what you need to do also in the education is to push the student to interact with the communities, to be active within the communities. This is a very costly work because it's an individual work, but it still needs to be done.
By the way, it has been said several times in an AI Sprint context that community is also important in AI because we need to have a sharing community for data and things like that. I thought I'd just mention that. But which brings me to Matteo. I would like to hear what your experience from AI Sprint has made you think about what we need to do in the future of education in this area.
So I will be very practical. Indeed, I will be teaching in 20 minutes from now a lecture on neural networks.
So speak fast.
Well, quite close to this room, so no need to rush. I think that universities are slowly changing their program. Not slowly because we don't want to catch up, but because we also play a role of smoothing of fashion and smoothing of news that comes and goes. So I think that the university has to play this role of consolidating knowledge, not chase knowledge. On the other hand, we have seen that AI has been playing more and more an important role, both from a technical perspective and economical perspective. Indeed, you can see almost any university setting up programs specialized on this topic, and also adapting the program of non-AI subject to specific aspects that are relevant. I'm thinking about hardware courses, which are more and more introducing technologies like accelerators or compilers. I'm looking at Giovanni, who's an expert on the topic. So I think that we have activated, for instance, a specialized program on AI and machine learning 3 years ago, and is plan of students, and we are fulfilling what is one of the mission of university, which is transferring knowledge. So, I mean, you might know that university has mainly 3 missions. One is building up knowledge, and this is why we are here as a researcher, trying to consolidate what is the knowledge about AI and the knowledge about all the tools that we have seen today. So as part of AI Sprint, we have also took the opportunity to teach our students at the PhD level the tools of AI Sprint. We haven't had today the chance to say that, but during the last 2 years, we also organized a couple of PhD courses where we taught to PhD students the topic that were studied here. And as I was saying, that's the first mission. The second is transfer knowledge to students, so is teaching, and that's what we do. And there is a third mission, which is try to transfer this technology to companies, and that's why you see today sitting in the same table people from the university. And I mean, you might have noticed a couple of times my name happening in Tommaso Ongarello's slide, because again, that's another example on how companies try to set up a fruitful collaboration with universities, knowing that there is a lot of knowledge and intellectual properties that can be exploited in research projects like the one that we are today somehow celebrating, and that could be transferred to companies, and they could become the base for, let's say, economic growth and business.
Thanks. And let me use that, and let me exploit what you just said as an opportunity to nail you down on exactly this question of technology transfer, Matteo. Once again, Georgia said 2 things today, right at the very beginning, that struck me. One is that the big companies seem to be doing the most right now. And the second is, if you look at who wants to be using AI, up to now, most seem to be kind of just sort of wanted to use it implicitly with whatever's being offered, rather than do it by themselves. So the question is, Matteo, I mean, the results of AI Sprint, are they going to be good for the big guys like Google, or who were you targeting with AI Sprint? What kind of companies were you targeting? What was your market there?
So I would love to see big players like Google, Meta, OpenAI coming here and say, "Oh, what marvelous technology you've done! I'm going to take it up immediately." But probably this will not happen soon. I think that, and this is also related to the open source and the community approach that we have taken, is that the target market or the target, let's say, customer of the tools that we have developed is not one of these big companies. They probably have their own same tools in-house. I'm not expecting them not to have any of these. It's more to fill the gap in small, medium enterprises that this morning Danilo started with that picture with a small red block of machine learning and a huge plethora of software and development tools that probably are the gap between the, let's say, potential of AI and machine learning and the impact that this could have in a small, medium enterprise. And because this is a lot of stuff and means that it's a high cost, I think that what we have done within AI Sprint is lowering this gap, lowering this cost, make this technology more accessible, and providing the tools for small, medium enterprises to approach new tools, approach new market, and exploit these technologies that, yes, we believe they will change the panorama of contemporary industry, but still it's not easy to assess. We need to educate people, but also we need to provide easy to access tools for the deployment of this technology. So this is the target I see, but again, I'm a professor, so I'm not probably the right person to ask to.
All right, well then let's ask Anna, one of our technology transfer experts.
Yes, thank you. I want to add something to your point of view. I guess that you are right. So it's not easy to find that the large companies are coming to universities and research centers asking for our results in order to be transferred there. So based on the experience of Barcelona Supercomputing Center, the best way in which we have identified that it's better to transfer technology to the market is by creating our own companies. The reason why is that the profiles that are ready to start working with this kind of technologies are close to universities, are close to research centers, and are far from companies. So based on our experience, we have created in the last 6 years 11 companies, most of them based on supercomputing and artificial intelligence. And to be honest, it's the best way that we have found to transfer it to market and to start working in creating this environment, networking, in order to reinforce other companies coming from the small and medium sector to enroll to this new area of artificial intelligence.
Thanks. Let's hear also from Pablo, who I think is getting yet another kind of portfolio of startups. Are you getting people who are leading with AI? Are you getting these kinds of people pitching to you, Pablo? What are you seeing coming across the desk, so to speak?
Okay, so nowadays, I think every second deck that we get has an AI in it.
No surprise somehow.
No surprise, and I think VC industry has always been prone to fads, and I think some of us remember, the .com bubble, right? just adding .com to your company name raised its valuation, several fold.
So now it's AI that you add.
Then we had the blockchain fad, right? So whatever you could do normally, if you put it on blockchain, it's suddenly made more sense to some. I think we are experiencing a fad of sorts nowadays, but there's also a general realization among investors, at least since mid last year, that AI is a huge disruption. So Of course, there is a plethora of startups who are doing AI things, and in fact, if you look closely at what they do, they are just thin layers on top of ChatGPT or other open source solutions. So these technologies are by definition not defensible and probably hold little value for VC investors. But at the same time, there's a lot of profound innovation happening, right? And I think since 2018-19, AI investments were on the rise. But what we've seen since mid last year is really an explosion in AI investments. So just to give you some numbers, whereas the entire VC market globally has been in a huge crunch, really almost unprecedented. So in comparison to 2021, the total value of VC investments this year is 80% down. Of course, the year is not finished, so we have a way to go. We may climb back to maybe 2018, 2019 levels, but we're nowhere where we were at the peak. In comparison, AI investments have surged by 50% in the first half of this year towards entire 2022. So you see a huge shift of money into the AI world, and specifically into startups that are working with generative AI, right? So so it's. I think there is a realization that this is a very transformative technology. It creates huge opportunities. There, of course, there are also risks, but there's a lot of excitement in that sphere at this point.
Well, what do you see about the opportunities and the risks? So opportunities, which fields are you seeing these in? Is it retail? Is it transport? What are they coming to you with?
Right. So investors seem to be flocking in this first phase to general purpose AI solutions, right? So to consumer products. I think we'll see an emergence of a huge number of startups working with all sorts of AI-powered agents, AI assistants, co-pilots, whatever you call them, right? This is happening, and I think the biggest recent investments in AI, which is Microsoft's injection of $10 billion into OpenAI, is exactly going into this direction. I mean, the entire Office 365 will have these plugins powered by ChatGPT, and will help us do things more productively. Also, there are startups that are experimenting, and actually, some of them are quite successful with generative AI in all sorts of creative fields. So, sales, marketing, it's actually going quite well. I'm pretty concerned about my friends in the ad sector. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I think what we are not seeing yet is a large number of industry-specific rollouts of AI. I mean, there are already some. So you mentioned optimization. Obviously, optimization, wherever you have routing problems, obviously AI can help, machine learning can help. So we see that in shipping industry. We see it in the airplane industry, airplane transportation. We see it also in automobile transportation. So AI, is coming in relatively big time. But for industrial, construction, energy applications, agriculture, I think there's a huge potential there. But not all of these technology deployments are so-called VC cases. So you have the problem of having these specialized, some call them hyper-local models, which are difficult to scale up. And the scaling issue is the principal issue for any venture capital fund, right? If you have problems transferring that technology to a different environment, to a different domain, if it needs to be adjusted, if the model doesn't work that well, then it's problematic. So, but I'm quite optimistic about this. I think what is happening in parallel is the low-code, no-code revolution, right? So many sort of traditional sectors of economy that were very tough to digitize, like agriculture, construction, manufacturing, because of the lack of experience dealing with ICT, because of lack of specialized personnel, are now having the opportunity to actually digitize with low-code, sometimes SaaS platforms. And now if you add AI on top of that, that really could prove very useful, because you could have a use case that generates relatively fast, very good economic outcomes without the necessity to invest a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Fabrizio.
Let me be a bit cynical. After what happened a couple of days ago, I think that also government and defense AI will have a big boost.
Okay, understood. Let me go back to Anna. You've heard now a lot of what Pavel said about what's going on in the VC market. You have a perspective. What are the added complications when you're doing it with the public administrations, with the government? You talked about dealing with that sort of thing. Can you say a few words about your experience about the problems with that are on top of the other problems?
Okay, so thank you for this question. You know that BSc is a public institution. We are a research institution, so that means that we have one, or our main goals is transferring technology outside the center. So to take into consideration the project's results in order to transfer it to society and market. But what happens? That is super easy to say about it, to have it at a clear objective. But the thing is that as a public institution, we have to find the procedure, the right procedure to transfer something that is being built under the public domain into the private world. That is not easy. The thing is that we have to take into consideration our public laws, and be in close collaboration with Spanish ministry in order to ask them for permission to transfer our research results outside of the research center. That means that this is not impossible, this is possible, but we have to take into consideration that all of this path needs more or less 1 year to be covered. So that means that when we are in contact with investors, with private sector, with some companies that wants to license our technologies, we have to stress this procedure, but sometimes the speed that the private sector needs is not the velocity that from the public sector we can provide.
Yes, I can well imagine that, indeed. Okay, first I would like to congratulate everybody in this room for waiting so long to mention ChatGPT, because it tends to suck all of the oxygen out of the room once we get started on generative AI. But I have to say that one thing I like about running a panel is that sometimes I can just ask a question I want to ask, and I have to ask about generative GPT. And I'd like to ask a pet question I have to Patrick, who is sitting here next to me. And this is about, and it's a fair question because it's also about open source. It's about, people are starting to talk about open sourcing large language models. And there's a high interest in this. And you seem to know something about this and have a particular interest in it. So I would like to hear your opinion and what you know and have to say about this.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So actually, yes, there are. So as Cloud and Heat, we are very, or open source is very important to us. So whereas there is an open source alternative, we will use it and not count on proprietary software. So also for the large language model section, there are now several open source alternatives to ChatGPT. The biggest one is coming from a big player. It's Meta, and the biggest open source large language model there is called Llama 2, and we also focus a bit on that also in the future, so we can make some adjustments for our company itself to use it, to also host it ourselves, so that our data we write into that model and ask that model questions about is not directly transferred to the big motherships like Meta or like OpenAI or Google or Microsoft itself. So yeah, I think especially regarding the large language model market, open source is also a very important step in that direction, that it will be successful, I think.
Mm-hmm. Do you? Paolo said that he believed that generative AI would open up a whole new set of possible applications. Do you agree with that? Is this what you're seeing? And what are they from your perspective? What are you seeing as possible?
Absolutely. I believe there will be market opportunities that we maybe even not thinking of right now. So we cannot imagine right now. But especially some things I see in the nearer future are that we maybe in our companies, in the smaller and middle-sized companies as well, we use large language model to chat about our documents we use in our company. For example, like we have large project documents, hundreds of sites, something like that, or even wikis, own internal wikis. We can then ask questions about something like that. I see as relatively in the near future.
And do you see cloud, AI sprint type applications, cloud edge to IoT applications coming out of this, like people be able to gather information as they go through the day?
Yeah, as well, absolutely. But that is something which, especially in Germany, is a bit tricky with personalized data and so on. If you wear a wearable which records the whole time, for example, your environment, and then maybe you can ask about your day, what you recorded during the day, something like that. Also in the research segment, or when you are on a trip or something like that. But that is a really, really tricky situation, especially in Germany, because a lot of people don't want to have their private data analyzed the whole time.
So we come right back to the fact that AI Sprint has been dealing with the correct problems, ethics, sensitive data, all things that will come back to us. Even with the new exciting applications of generative AI, we will come right back to the problems that AI Sprint has been studying. So
absolutely, yeah.
All right, I would like to. We're coming up to the close of the session, and I would like to come right back to the first speaker of the day, which is Giorgio. And I'd say you told us something about what has been happening up to now. I would like to hear what you think are the most important things we need to be thinking about in the near to midterm coming up.
This is a very tricky question. So thank you, John. Honestly, I don't have any, how do you say, any ball with, how's it called it in English? The crystal ball, yeah. And also I'm not an engineer and not a professor myself, and I can only take what I see in the numbers, and that have been also quoted here from different sources. Personally, I believe that the business will be fundamental. I mean, again and again, we need public money. We need investments. We need a push from public bodies, and the European Commission is certainly one of the first actors here, and one of the most efficient as well. So let's recognize it. We need again from the public sector, let's say, the regulatory framework and the push from this regulatory but without private money, in my opinion, there is not much that we can do. So this is a call of action and a wake-up call for Europe in particular. So we need to take advantage of what governments, but also supranational organizations like the European Commission are doing, so like the EU is doing. But we have not to forget the role of the public, of the private sector. So in my opinion, there must be, again, this coalition and alliance between the public and the private. Without the private, given the amount of money that has been poured in this technological pool, we have seen also, I think also Pavel mentioned, there is little we can move forward with.
I would like to go back to Pavel on this, and therefore, from your perspective as a private investor, what do you see are the things that really, from what is coming across your desk, what do you see are the things we need to look out for in the midterm? What are the most important priorities ahead of us in this sector?
Okay, so I think one challenge ahead of AI startups who I'm working with has already been mentioned by you, and this is the human capital shortage. There's no way of sort of dealing with it. I think I recently saw an interesting study based on Google searches across Europe. So they studied, what were the queries about the most attractive potential job. So the young people would give. So how to become, an astronaut or an engineer. And in most European countries, it seems like the most interesting job is to be a writer. Like I think over 50% of countries. In France, I think it was a public servant. In Germany, it was a professor.
In Italy?
I'm not sure. I think a writer. A writer is quite likely. Or
it was entrepreneur.
It was an entrepreneur. So this is good. So hopefully, in some countries, we will have these young people aspiring to be entrepreneurs, also aspiring to be engineers, right? Actually, Poland was the reason why I remember is that Poland was one of the few, I think, 3 countries where software engineer seemed to be like the hottest job. But I think we need to create conditions for people to actually want to have careers in that area, because funding on its own is not going to do it, right? And I think we have that tendency to throw public money at, if we see a challenge in Europe, then we have 2 ways, throwing public money and regulating, right? There's this saying that, the global division of labor is that the US invents, China manufactures, and Europe regulates, right? And actually, maybe it's not a bad idea if you talk about, AI, because it's certainly, an area where risks exist. Some argue, like, Max Tegmark or, earlier Stephen Hawking, that these are actually existential risks for us. So yeah, regulation is important, but we should make sure that we don't over-regulate this sector, right? Because as far as some of the regulations that are being now created will probably be looked at, in a decade or two from now as being silly, right? I think in the mid-19th century, when automobiles were first introduced in the UK, there was this so-called red flag law. I don't know if you know what it was. So in, I think, 1865, when private automobiles were first let to be used on private roads in the UK, there was a law that was later called red flag law, that whenever you use the car, there had to be a person with a red flag, moving in front of it, and then at night it had to be a red lantern, right? Just to make sure that it's safe, right? So I think some risks are perhaps overestimated, but other are, I'm sure, unobserved. For example, it took 70 years from 1865 in the UK to require people to have driving licenses, to think that, okay, people should be somehow prepared, certified, to operate cars. 70 years, not quite a long time. So we'll see how it goes. I think it's a very, fluid area, but there is, the private money is ready, I think, to invest in that space. I think the ChatGPT has done a lot of good stuff because it has opened people's eyes, not just to the possibilities of these large language models, but also, to the exponential pace of growth of that technology, right? I mean, if you compare performance of ChatGPT 3, 3.5, and 4, you can see that it has changed dramatically, right? So I think people are realizing that the opportunity is there and the opportunity is now. So we'll see how we take advantage of it.
Thanks very much. And let's hope that AI Sprint makes a big contribution to increasing human capital in the space of AI. So I want to thank all of the members of the panel for speaking to us, both in presence and online. Thank you, Juan Carlos. I'd like to turn over the floor now to Danilo for some final words.
So thank you, Amir. I mean, I will take just the last 5 minutes of your time for today. It has been a very long day, and I hope that the discussions were interesting. I've also learned something. I hope that it was the same for you actually. And here. I just to wrap up and to give some take-home messages from the day. I think that AI probably is not an hype. We have been working on green IT, as Fabrizio mentioned. We have been working on big data, and then now we're working on AI. But probably AI is really here to stay, we have still some issue in the development, in the operation of the system, and in scaling the AI application. We said that really these, there are several challenges because not only of the distributed computing that is the focus of our research, but also because of being computing intensive. And this trend probably is gonna stay for, I don't know, the next 10 years. What we have seen, I mean, in 2012, more or less, when one of the first, I mean, was not the very first, but when the convolutional neural network became the state of the art for image processing, we were shifting our attention from traditional machine learning to convolutional neural network. And given the last discussion we had now on the generative large language models, this shift happened really. This was really recent this year. We're switching from our attention from deep learning to the generative models. And now, I mean, there are some production environment, and research is also focusing on multimodal generative models. So I hope that really in a couple of years, whatever other European project I'm involved in, I give to the new ChatGPT the deliverable of our project, and I can ask, oh, please cook for me a couple of hour presentation with all the demo things. So we would save a lot of money, right? Money and time, actually. So this would be very, very, very nice. So this is probably, I mean, but let's see what will happen. How much we need to take this trend to solve this problem. Here I really invite also the people that are from remote, that are not still part of our alliance. We still run our project a couple of months. We have the commitment also to support, you can join our alliance at any time. We have the commitment really to sustain our solution for 3 years. That's, I mean, the things that naturally happen with the European funded project nowadays. We have also the commitment of our cloud indeed provider to provide free access to the end user that want to try to test our technology. So that's something that really, so please get in touch with us. There is a form on the website, so provide your contact and we will be back to you. We are in the last wave of the project, so we are going to update our website with the tutorials, with the use of our tools. We are also working to a MOOC, so we will have some extended discussion and introduction to the problems we solved with our tools. But really, for the sake of time, and let me give to this slide where I would like really to thank all the, this is a long journey, we are close to the end. There is a huge effort of all the partners that are involved in the project. I thank them here for their commitment. We are still 2 months ago, so please don't distract, please stay focused, because otherwise I'm in trouble, okay? And really, thanks to all for the effort for making our project going smoothly. For, I mean, really, I think we are proud of the tool we are developing, and so really, I thank you all. And the last word of this day, actually, you know, I'm a bit excited for this. This day is the dissemination day. Is the very last activity for dissemination, and you know, unfortunately, 1 year ago almost, we have lost Stephanie, who was really the dissemination leader, and I hope that we did this day as she wished. She was really she had an active role in the proposal preparation. So we ran a sprint, and also we gave a big thank to Steph. And really, this is one of the last activity of for dissemination for us, and I really hope that we did as she liked. Okay, So thank you all.